snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys, so I am here today to do a book review, and the book that I'm going to be reviewing is book number 2 in the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. This is The Blinding Knife, and this book was so much better than the first one. I liked the first one a lot. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was really interesting as a concept. I just felt like the story was had moments of tedium, and it also had moments where there was a lot of exposition. This one was better than that. It was by far Brent Weeks back to top form, which I loved seeing, and I really enjoyed this. So I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm going to tell you guys what I really enjoyed about this one. The biggest problem I had with the first one was that it was a lot of exposition. There was a lot of focus on explaining the magic system, whereas in this one I feel like we really already knew the magic system, so it's only expanding our already existing knowledge. And when we did have moments where it was explaining a new thing, it didn't feel like it was that long of a passage that was explaining, so I felt like it was really interesting and it was all good, exciting stuff. This book definitely blows the first one away in terms of action-packed scenes, because although the first one has a lot of action, this one has way more, and it's a lot more intense, and there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more conspiracies and plots and things that are all kind of underhanded and underfoot, and we really get to explore the characters more as well. I loved learning about the different Chromeria politics, intricacies, and we really get to see that there's a lot of different factions and divisions and sort of allegiances in the Chromeria that are sort of less noticeable to someone who doesn't know about it, but when you look hard enough you can kind of see that there are these alliances that have been formed there. We get to see a lot more of the political players, and we see our main character Kip as he tries to kind of manoeuvre his way through all of this without knowing an awful lot about it. He's not really been taught from birth about these different divisions and subtleties, so he kind of has a little bit of trouble manoeuvring his way through everything and sorting out exactly what he should be doing. And we get to see him try and integrate into the Chromeria despite not really knowing anything about it, and also being challenged by wanting to become a blackguard. I absolutely loved learning about Andross Guile, who is the father to Kip's dad, which means he's Kip's grandfather. The scenes between Kip and Andross were really interesting. They were always a lot of fun. We get to see a lot of scenes of them playing Nine Kings, which sounds like a really interesting game, so I hope that one day we get to see Nine Kings as an actual game. That would be cool. It's a really interesting concept, and there's a lot of sort of backstabbing and manoeuvring that you have to do in the game, which really represents the Chromeria very well as a kind of smaller representation. The cards of the Nine Kings game also were really beautifully described, so I could vividly imagine them, which was great. And I loved the game as a kind of platform for betrayal and manipulation. There's a lot of crafty tricks that you can use or you can employ to kind of trick your opponent, so that was definitely a kind of metaphor for the whole Chromeria and Andross Guile as a whole. Some of the other characters who I enjoyed seeing in the book, some of them are newer, some of them we've seen before. First one is Kip. Obviously he's our main character, and I really enjoyed seeing him and getting to know him a little bit more than we did in the first book, because the first book we get a little bit of his backstory and we get to know him a little bit, but in this one we see how he fares when he's kind of put into a situation that he's uncomfortable with and he has to deal with a lot of different stuff, and it's kind of more of a coming of age story in this one than it is in the first one. The first one's more of a trying to discover what he needs to do next because there's been all these tragedies. This one's more of a coming of age, like dealing with going through the school process and settling in and finding out all the things he needs to know about and learning some of the magic that he needs to know. So I really enjoyed this one for that element. I felt like he was slightly irritating in book 1 as well, whereas in book 2 I feel like that has kind of gone out of his personality a lot more. He's quite sarcastic and he's quite self-deprecating, which at times is very funny and at times it's a little bit awkward. It goes both ways, but I do think he's a really interesting character as a whole. By the end of book 2 he really seems to know a lot more about who he wants to be as a person, which I think helps his personality develop a lot more from what it was initially when he was a bit unsure and he didn't really know who he wanted to be. So by the end of this he does know a lot more about that, which is good. He's a great character because he starts with such a big weakness of being fat and being kind of self-deprecating and not having any real self-confidence, and those are all big flaws in his personality, and by the end of book 2 he's sort of starting to adjust to this and confront these problems and these issues and and start to become his own person and believe in himself and see that he can do things and he is the sort of person who has the ability to go on and do great things. Next, of course, Andross Guile is the one who I already mentioned. He is the red Soitrop, and he's a really interesting character. He's very conniving, he's very sneaky, he's very full of all these dark manoeuvres. We don't always know what he's doing. He's very crafty, and he basically seems to be the one behind everything, pulling all the strings. And he's kind of a genius with a lot of flair for manipulating people, and he also is quite known for like fiery outbursts every now and then as well. And I loved seeing the interactions that he had and how he used Woody, who is his like slave or servant, for his kind of evil purposes, and they made a kind of creepy but nasty pair. Really interesting to read about. Then we have Tia, who is a new character that we meet in this book. Tia is a wonderful new addition to this story. She's actually a slave who is in training to become a blackguard. She's being kept by a pretty nasty woman, and she's being moved around like a player in the game against the Guiles by the person who owns her. However, when she befriends Kip, she starts to kind of see things a little bit differently. Her loyalties get tested and she's put into some tougher situations. I found Tia's storyline to be one of the most interesting in the book. I think her struggles with being a slave and duty to her master, but also loyalty to her friends, was really interesting to see, and I think that she's just a good character. She also has some very like intimidating moments. There are some moments where she gets a lot of threats from the person who owns her, and they were certainly scary scenes. She's been through a lot in this book, and she has been through a lot in her past, but she's still a great character with a lot of charisma and a lot of fun despite that, and she has a lot of fight in her. She really wants to be a blackguard, and it's something she's going to fight for. Gavin Guile is the prism for the Chromeria, which means he's the most powerful man in the world. He can draft all of the 7 colours, and colour drafting is the main magic in this series. So if you can draft all 7 colours, then you are the prism. There's only one prism at any one time, and Gavin Guile is essentially the most powerful person ever, but he kind of has to deal with a lot of different things in this book. He's certainly kind of unpredictable, he makes mistakes, and this makes him someone who is really interesting to read about and learn about, because it's quite hard to predict what he's going to do next, but very fun to follow his adventures. He's also got a lot on his plate when it comes to unpredictable things. He has a lot of scary things that come into his plotline where he has to kind of face them head on and challenge that and try and do his best to stop whatever he thinks is going to happen from happening, and he always tries to do whatever he believes the right thing is. Then we have Liv, who is a young girl who grew up in the same village as Kip, but she's now in a completely and entirely different situation from that she was in the first book. She's separated from her earlier friends, and she's in a whole entirely different ball game, a different situation. She's kind of mingling with the other side. Her plot gives us a lot of glimpses at the other side, a lot of glimpses at the enemy and the person that we don't really want to win, which I thought was really, really interesting, and I think we learned a lot from her. But I didn't feel like her as a character was that interesting, so even though what she told us about the other side was interesting, I don't like her as a character so much, so she's the character I dislike out the book, I guess. Like, she's the one character who I'm not really a fan of reading her parts so much. Even though they're well written, even though they tell us information, I just don't like her. What can you do? Then we have Karris and Ironfist, who are both awesome characters in their own right as well. Although they were a little bit more minor in this, I still think they're great characters. The plot itself is mostly focused around a battle for power, as most fantasy books are, and it's between Gavin and the Chromeria against the Colour Prince, who is a new enemy who's recently emerged, and we met him in book number 1, but in this one we get to see a lot more of him from Liv's point of view. There is always a kind of constant battle that is on edge, and it's kind of prevalent in everyone's minds. However, this book has a lot more going on than the first one in terms of plot lines. We see a lot more multiple different plot lines, and we also see a lot more coalescing of the plot lines, all weaving together and coming together in different ways. And there's also a lot more sort of smaller plot lines that are really, really interesting, and these feed into the overall story. We also see a lot more magical expansion in this one. Even though we kind of had the basis from the first book and that was a lot of explanation, we still see some expansion of various different things that we didn't know about yet, because obviously he's at the Chromeria, he's learning how to control his powers, so we learn a lot more about the magic, and there's some really interesting elements that I didn't imagine being in this book, but they were so cool and really interesting. We learn about new weapons, new ideas, new inventions. There's basically a whole lot of stuff going on in this book, and it's really great. It does mean that you have to pay attention because there's always new stuff being introduced, but it's done in a really great way compared to the first book. I feel like this was a lot more seamless, and Weeks is just a great writer, so this one was definitely him back on top form, as I said. I don't think he assumes that the audience of his books are dumb as well. I think that's a great thing, is that he assumes that you are an intelligent individual and you can follow all these different threads, and that's something I really enjoy. So I like that. I like the fact that there's a bit of challenge with trying to understand all of these different ideas surrounding Chromeria and magic and colours and Luxin. Luxin is like the drafting of magic and things like that. So there's loads of cool stuff in this book and I think it's really interesting. Basically, this book was pretty awesome and I really, really enjoyed it. I definitely think it's an improvement on the first one and I'm hoping that the third one will be even better, so I can't wait to get to that sometime very soon. I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. Fantastic, awesome. Can't wait to read book number 3 very, very soon. So let me know your thoughts if you guys have read the series. I'd love to hear them. Thank you all for watching and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye! Me and you gonna have a little chat about the